My name is Chanel White, a student at Miami-Dade College, and welcome to today's special program. Within the next half hour, we'll be spending some time with some of the authors that are taking part in today's event at the Miami Book Fair International. You might know her as the author of The Princess Diaries. An Indiana University graduate, we are here with Miss Meg Cabot. How are you?
I'm great, thanks for having me.
So one of the first questions that I want to ask you is, what inspired you to actually become a writer?
I don't know. I just always loved writing. It was kind of a hobby of mine, and I just had so many books that I'd written at home and kind of hidden away that it kind of made sense to start trying to get them published. And I can't say it was an easy road. I got rejected a lot, but finally, one day somebody bit.
Really? Because I know that you've written over, 50 books, and, you've been out for quite some time, You have this new book out. It's called Bride War Size 12. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Well, the Bride War Size 12 is obviously about a young lady who wears a size 12, and she is about to get married, but there are a few problems along the way, and one of them is a murder. So it's actually part of a mystery series. It's book 5. But you don't really need to have read the first 4, although I would love it if you did, to understand what's happening. But Heather is a young lady who gets a job actually working in a college. And, she's kind of trying to find her way. She's not sure what she wants to do with herself, but, these bodies keep popping up at the college. And just a few weeks before she gets married, that's what happens. And she's got to solve the crime before she can march down the aisle. So it's a little bit comical, but it's also suspenseful and a little bit scary.
So now the title is definitely very interesting. What made you come up with the title?
Well, we have so many heroines in literature and also in film who are so small. They don't really represent the average American woman whose size is actually a 12 or a 14. So I wanted to write about a young lady who actually represents the average American gal. But she is a size 12 and she finds love. She's actually just an average lady who actually finds a really hot guy who loves her exactly the way she is. And I don't want to give away the ending, but she probably does get married to this guy who thinks she's great, and she may solve the crime too. So she gets it all.
Now, in this particular novel, is there a specific message that you are trying to get across to your readers?
Yeah, I think what I'm really trying to say in all of the books is that we all have to care about each other. There's a lot of kind of privilege and self-entitlement that we see a lot on television and the media. And in my books, I just kind of want to say, maybe we need to take a step back and kind of see people for who they are and really care about each other for who we are on the inside and not so much on the outside. And maybe it's not kind of the pursuit of wealth that matters, but the pursuit of friendship and love.
Really? You don't find many people who, have that mindset with love or with marriage, period. So with the Princess Diaries, I know that was one of your books that, became a film. It was 2 films that it actually, turned into. How did you feel about that? Was that something you were excited about? Were you proud of? I, was a fan of both of the movies. I remember watching them as a little girl. So how were you feeling when you found out that those movies were going to turn
That was just
into...
an amazing thing. I actually was working in a college when that happened. I don't want to say I was exactly like Heather from the Bride War Size 12, but it's true. She was working in a college dorm, and so was I when I wrote The Princess Diaries. Maybe while my boss was not looking, and I got the phone call while I was sitting at my desk that they were going to make a movie of that starring Julie Andrews and Anne Hathaway, and I freaked out. I couldn't believe it because those books were really meaningful to me. They are kind of about the same thing, staying true to yourself and understanding that just beyond the glitz and glamour, there are things that are more important, like who your true friends are.
Yes.
And the fact that they made movies out of those, that completely changed my life. I was able to quit my job and write full time, which was always my dream. So I am so indebted to those movies. I still get letters every day from kids telling me, I saw those movies and I had never read a book before, and I went out and got the book after seeing those movies, and now I can't stop reading. So I just love it. I live in the dream.
I know you said you live in Key West. How long have you been living in Key West?
I've been living in Key West about 10 years. One of the things I was able to do once I was able to start writing full time and my books started to sell was I was able to move from New York City, which I love New York City so much, but it's a little cold there for me, especially this time of year. So we always dreamed of being able to move to Key West, which is where we went on vacation all the time. So now I live where I was able to go on vacation, and it's fabulous.
And I'm sure you're loving the weather here,
yes,
because
you know
it's a lot warmer here than it is in New York City. Tell us about your background. Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I'm originally from Indiana, and I went to Indiana University. My father was actually born here in Miami, and so when he got a job after he graduated, he got a job teaching in Indiana. So that's where I was born and raised. And then I moved to New York City after I graduated, and eventually made my way back.
Tell us about your family.
Well, my dad, like I said, grew up in Miami. He went to the University of Miami, and later went on to the Midwest, where I was raised. I have a brother who's a police officer, another brother who's an entertainer, and my mom is actually an artist. So I come from kind of a creative but also educational background, and I think that probably played into a lot of why I'm a writer. But my parents both read a lot and really kind of influenced our decisions on what to do in our free time. A lot of it was, you know what, if you're bored, go read a book. No. Here's a library card.
Now, you did say that you are a graduate of Indiana University. What did you end up majoring in? What is your degree in?
You know, I actually majored in art.
Really?
Not writing, because I was so afraid of being rejected. I didn't want to take any writing classes in case somebody didn't like my writing.
Really?
Which is terrible. I think if there's something you really want to do, you shouldn't be afraid of rejection, because I did get rejected a lot. The Princess Diaries got rejected probably 20 or 30 times by publishers. It did not get snapped up right away. So something, if you really love something and you want to do it, who cares if somebody says you're not good at it? If you love it, keep doing it. You never know what's going to happen.
Wow, I'm sure a lot of those publishers are upset now. It was a very successful movie. Very successful movie. Well, Ms. Kabat, we thank you. We thank you. I appreciated your time. Stay tuned. We have a few more authors coming up.
Cool programs for hot jobs. Let Miami-Dade College jumpstart your career. We offer bachelor's degrees in film and TV production, electronics engineering, supervision and management, and nursing. Or choose from 300 other programs. With our flexible course schedules, you can take classes during the day, evening, weekend, or online. For more info, visit mdc.edu or call 305-237-8888. Get the knowledge and training for today's in-demand jobs. Register now.
Welcome back to MDC-TV. He's a member of the National Advisory Council on Drug Abuse. He's an associate professor of psychology and psychiatry at Columbia University. He sits as a board member of the College on Problems of Drug Dependency, and he's conducted over 20 years of research in neuropsychology, pharmacology, and the science of drug addiction. Who am I talking about? Dr. Carl Hart, who is here with us today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you being here with us today. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you was, what inspired you to become a writer?
I wanted to communicate with the broader audience more so. So when you write science paper, only about 10, 20 people read those papers. Nobody reads all this important work, this expensive work. So one of the ways to reach a broader audience is to become a writer and write in a way that people find entertaining and engaging. And I hope I did that with High Price.
Okay. Now I know that you are here promoting your new book, High Price, Drugs and Society. What made you write something? What made you write this book? Because this topic is very broad, and it can cause a lot of controversy, based off certain people's opinions and their upbringing. So what made you go ahead and take that initiative to go ahead and write that?
So the major reason that I wrote the book was because over this 20-something years of studying drugs, I've learned some things along the way, things that challenged my thinking, things that challenged the way I saw our society. I learned that our society is racist in many respects, and they were using, or we were using, drug laws to perpetuate this racism. And so you say, well, how do you do that? Well, we've been lying to people about how harmful drugs are. We exaggerated the effects of drugs to the point where people believe they're so dangerous. Now, that's not to say that people should go out and use drugs, because that's not the point. The point here is that we overstated the dangers of these drugs in order to have these severely restrictive laws that punished people harshly, and they disproportionately punished black people, brown people from communities where I came from. So I felt like I would be irresponsible if I didn't share what I learned with the public about drugs and drug laws.
Okay. Now, I do know that you are a Miami native. What led you to becoming a professor?
So one of the things that happened was, along the way, my journey from Miami in the hood to where I'm at now, a professor, there were a number of things that happened along the way. One of the things that happened along the way was I learned how to think. And when you learn how to think, I wanted to do my craft at the highest level. And the highest level was becoming a scientist. And then teaching other people what I learned through my classrooms, through textbooks that I've written, and those sorts of things. And so being a professor seemed to be the ideal field for this.
Okay. What school did you graduate from?
Undergraduate, I graduated from the University of Maryland,
Okay.
but I had never actually spent time on the campus of the University of Maryland because I took classes while I was in the Air Force overseas.
Okay.
And the University of Maryland has universities or campuses or classes on Air Force bases around the world. Graduate school, I graduated from the University of Wyoming, and then I did postdoctoral fellowships at places like the University of California, San Francisco, Yale, and Columbia.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a personal question. Are you for legalizing drugs?
That's not a personal question. I thought you were going to ask me about my sexual behavior or something like that. In the book, I argue that we should decriminalize drugs. I think people need to know the difference between legalization and decriminalization. Legalization is what we do with alcohol and tobacco. You can purchase these things if you're of age, you can sell these things. But with decriminalization, you can't sell these things. The drugs still remain illegal. But rather than punishing them the way we do with felonies and those sorts of things, ruining people's lives, decriminalization will be treated where we treat drugs like a traffic violation. You may have to pay a fine, but you certainly won't be arrested for drugs.
Okay. When you started writing this book, or when you started creating ideas in your mind about writing this book, was it something that you found particularly hard about writing this book?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, if you high price is deeply personal, particularly in the beginning. I have to tell some of the sort of pathology that went on in my family. By the way, the same pathology goes on in a number of families, but we just lie about it. So I had to be honest about some of the things that I was not so proud of. That was difficult, as many people will understand. So it's difficult talking about yourself in that way. It might sometimes come across as being frivolous. It may sometimes come across as bragging. All of these sorts of things, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to contextualize drug use primarily. Oftentimes when we think about drug use, it's not contextualized. When I say contextualize, you need to understand the setting, because the setting it has such a powerful effect on drugs. The pharmacology of the drugs have some effects, but the setting, the environment, they have far more effects on drug effects.
I think that's awesome, because a lot of times when people are writing books, they don't like to get personal, because sometimes our personal lives can hurt, and we don't want to share that with people. So for you to take that initiative and tell your personal story, to illustrate your story, to help others, is really awesome, because you don't find many people who are doing that. So my next question for you is, what's next? What have you been working on lately?
What's next? There's so many things. So I'm trying to do my science. I'm still trying to do my lab research. I am thinking about the next book. I am writing a lot of op-ed pieces for various newspapers. So there's so much that's next. I'm overwhelmed when you say what's next, and I'm trying to field. I get so many emails and letters about this book because people feel like they connect with it so much. So I'm trying to get a break is what I'm trying to do.
Well, how do you balance that? Because you have so much going on. You're teaching, you're writing, you have interviews, you're all over the place. How are you finding the balance in all of that?
I don't know how to balance. All I know is that I just have to keep responding. And so I don't know how well I'm balancing.
Thank you very much for interviewing with us today. We'll be right back after this short break.
Fresh thinking is being served at Miami-Dade College. Create your own recipe for success in the evolution of food culture at the Miami Culinary Institute. Learn the skills you need to jumpstart your career in the culinary arts. Turn green into gourmet and celery into salary. Miami Culinary Institute. Food, culture, innovation. Visit us at miamidadeculinary.com. Register now. Miami Culinary Institute.
Welcome back. We are here at the Miami Book Fair International. From tacos to tamales, Latin American street food takes cooks on a tasting tour of some of the most popular culinary finds of Latin America. Well, the talk of the town is who has written this book. I'm sitting here with Miss Sandra Gutierrez. How are you
Good,
today?
Chanel. How are you? And thank you for having
fine.
me.
Well, no, we appreciate you being here. Now, before we go into details about this book that you're promoting, I want to know personally, what started you to cook? How did you get into cooking?
I started cooking as a little girl in my grandmother's kitchen. It's not unusual for people in the food business to start at home. And I learned there, and then I went into college to become a writer. And my world sort of collided when I moved to North Carolina, and I found my career as a food writer. So both my writing and my food world came together.
So what school did you attend? Where did you get your degree from?
I went to Smith College
Okay.
in Massachusetts, yeah.
And you took up?
I was an English major there, and I took up writing and cooking together. In North Carolina, I was offered the food editor position for the Cary News in North Carolina.
Really?
And I thought to myself, I can do this. And that was over 20 years ago. So I started writing a column and taking care of a section, and then it grew, and then I went freelance, and 20 years later, the first book came out.
Okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this is your second book.
This is my second book.
This
yes.
is your second book. So tell us about your book.
So Latin American Street Food is a book that compiles recipes from 20 different Latin American countries. I wanted to write a book that showcased the cuisines and the difference in each one of our cuisines, all the way from Mexico down to Argentina. I think it's important for people, here in Miami, people know that we all come from different areas and that our cuisines are different, but in the rest of the United States, people are not that familiar with the differences between our cuisines. And I thought, what better, more fun way to introduce Latin American cuisines in their most casual, informal way than with fun street food.
Oh, okay.
So that's where the idea came from.
Oh, so cooking is something that you enjoy. What age did you start cooking? I know you say you were younger, but how old were you?
I was about 7 or 8 years old when I started. My grandmother was a very big socialite with a lot of entertaining things going on. I was living in Guatemala back then.
Okay.
And so every weekend she would host family and a lot of people who would come over for lunch, and I was very shy. So I would hide in the kitchen, and the only way I was allowed in the kitchen was if I would do something. There were no idle hands in the kitchen. So I started doing very little things like, shelling beans, and then I worked up to making empanadas, and then, I was given more and more a key role in the kitchen as I grew older. And by the same time, I had an aunt who was a caterer, a very famous caterer in Guatemala, and she would invite me to come and help her make all the little things, and she was a trained chef, so she would teach me the techniques, all the French techniques. So without knowing it, without paying for it, just by my grandmother and my great aunt, I learned the basics of cooking. And I grew up then to not only become a writer and a food writer, but I also teach cooking. I teach culinary all over the United States, so I go around and I teach future chefs and vocational cooks, home cooks, how to cook. And I love it. It's my favorite thing is to teach. And for me, writing is an extra branch of teaching. I reach more people through a book, but I approach a book like I do a class, so that every recipe has a little bit of history, where the ingredients came from, but also all the cooking tips that make cooking classes so much fun. You know, what things can you freeze ahead of time? What kinds of steps can you do before your guests come over? How to reheat food? How to make a good sauce in a blender. All those little tips are given within the recipes in a really fun way, so that if people are beginner cooks, they can follow my book to the letter. It's as if I were standing next to them. But if people love to read books like novels, they find all the history and all the background.
Wow. Now I'm looking at this book. This looks like a pretty thick book. How many recipes are in this book?
150 recipes.
Wow.
And it was hard to narrow it down to 150 recipes, because as you know, the streets are filled with wonderful, wonderful food in Latin America. So I tried to include every country. So I have 20 out of 21 countries in Latin America in the book. And each one, I put probably 2 or 3 from each country. So you'll find favorites from all over the place in Latin America. You have alfajores from Argentina, for instance. You have the tacos al pastor from Mexico. You have the pupusas from El Salvador, how to make them. Pupusas are masa cakes that are stuffed with cheese or beans, and then they're topped with this delicious tomato sauce and a wonderfully refreshing slaw made with cabbages. So that's one of the recipes. I have food from Nicaragua, the famous vigorón, that is served in a banana leaf, wrapped in a banana leaf, and it's a salad with yuca and pork rinds, and again a cabbage slaw and some chile on top. I've included dishes from Cuba, things that you'll probably find here in Miami, like the jamon, croquetas de jamon or ham croquettes, and the empanadas with guava and cream cheese, and the empanadas with spinach. So several of the Cuban recipes made it into the book as well. So really, food from all over, from the best hot dog that you'll find in Latin America, in Argentina, the choripan with a wonderful chimichurri sauce on top, to the most casual hot dog found in Guatemala, filled with avocado sauce called a chuco.
Wow. So for people like me who don't cook that much, who stay away from the kitchen, who don't want to be bothered, what type of advice do you give people like me who, you know, maybe have an interest in cooking, but every time they try, it just doesn't work out right? Do you think that your book would help people like me, you know, learn how to cook the way that you have these recipes written in here?
Absolutely. First of all, I include a whole chapter in the book called the raw bar. And these are foods that are raw. You don't even have to cook them, like ceviches. You just mix everything in a bowl and eat it. I call it toss and eat food. Very simple if you don't like to cook, or if it's a warm day and you don't want to turn on the stove. But a good recipe that you can follow is a key to cooking. And I think that many people feel they can't cook because they don't have good tested recipes. And all the recipes in the book have been tested. I have a whole section of sandwiches, the fun sandwiches in the street. Also really no cooking recipes, you know. But what I would say is start with something easy. The beauty of Latin street food is that it's easy to make. Remember, vendors don't have elaborate kitchens. They don't have big equipment to cook from. So it's very easy to make at home. It's very inexpensive because the ingredients in Latin America in the streets are very organic. They're not expensive ingredients to cook with, and they're quick to assemble, so that some of the parts you can do ahead of time, and then you just get together and put it quickly on the table. So it's ideal for people who are beginner cooks. And then of course you have the chapter of empanadas and the chapter of tamales, which require a little bit more time investment in the kitchen. To produce a lot of tamales, you maybe spend one afternoon. Wow. But I tell you how to freeze them, and then all you have to do is simmer them in some water, and you've got a tamale ready. Wow. So it's, you know, a little bit for everybody.
We've learned so much information from you today. So much, so much. What's next? What's for the future? What do you have planned?
2 more books coming
more?
out.
Wow,
Yes, 2 in
2 more.
2015.
Okay.
The third one is already written. It's a book again. I'm going back to the south of the United States with a book on beans and field peas. And my fourth book is going to be the Empanada Bible. Again, Latin
Wow.
America, all the empanadas from Latin America, so we can get a good picture of how different empanadas are.
Wow. Well, we appreciate you today, Miss Sandra Gutierrez. I've learned so much from you and your book today, and I'm sure will be great use to others. This ends today's program. If you've missed this year's book fair, remember that next year you'll have the opportunity to meet with different authors and enjoy the fun of reading. We hope to see you then. Until next time, I'm Chanel White, and remember, the more you read, the more you know.